Hey everyone, it's Lindsay Rhodes, and I've got a new podcast, the NFL Road Show. Fun and kind of nerdy conversation about the NFL every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I've got some amazing guests that are joining me. I'll be breaking the huddle with the top stories, previewing games. We'll get you set for the weekend fantasy with our Fantasy Friday episodes, and we'll answer some of your questions as well. So subscribe to the NFL Road Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What is crack-a-lackin' Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my fantastic co-host, Adam Frommel. I am, however, as you can guess, super excited to continue our Team Lookahead series. Our two teams today are going to be the Milwaukee Bucks and the New Orleans Pelicans. First up with the Bucks is Ti Windisch. He is also from Blue Wire Pods. He hosts the Gyro Step podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Ti Windisch. That's at TIWINDSCH. We have a great conversation. Another great conversation was had with me and Mason Ginsberg, who is also from Blue Wire Pods. He co-hosts the In the Know podcast and also provides some words for Bourbon Street Shots on occasion. Follow him on Twitter at Mason Ginsberg, MASONGINSBERG. We really go into the weeds on the Pelicans and what to expect from them. Both of these, as usual, they were a lot of fun. We hope you enjoy them. Before we get started, though, just our usual reminder, our usual plea. Rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you're getting your podcasts. Download every episode. If you are a first-time listener, we appreciate all subscriptions, ratings, reviews. Even if you don't use iTunes, though, please head over there. Search Hardwood Knocks. Throw us that 5-star rating. Write a review. Those help us out a bunch as well. We want to juice those numbers up. That's what we're asking. Begging, imploring, pleading. Please make me stop pleading. Head over there. Without further delay, though, let's get to talking some Milwaukee Bucks with Ti Windisch from the Gyro Step podcast and Mason Ginsberg from the In the Know podcast.
Mason, welcome back. Thank you for coming on the Hardwood Knocks podcast. It's been, I don't know, since the last time you came on. I think you've been on twice before, but it's definitely been many minutes. How are you doing?
Good. It's been a year, but it's been a year for literally everyone. And, making it, can't complain too much. I'm currently enjoying some southern weather, even though I live in Chicago. So I am, I've been able to escape being quarantining in a pandemic in one of the cold cities in North America or in America. So, all good. I'm ready for a new season, NBA season to start.
Yeah, let's talk some Pelicans. I'm going to start. This is more reflective than anything, but I think I'm still shocked at the haul they got for Jrue Holiday. And I know that Giannis re-signing with the Bucks changes the context of some of those picks and swaps, but to have control of 4 draft picks essentially that far out, and even sort of the little stuff where it's they got George Hill in that deal. They eventually moved, he ends up in OKC, but that was just part of looking from Milwaukee's perspective. Was you couldn't even there was a way to structure that deal money wise without having George Hill in it. You couldn't figure that out. So the fact that it was just such a massive haul, I know New Orleans had leverage, but were you surprised by what they ultimately were able to get for Jrue?
So yes and no. I think I was always more on the optimistic side of the discussion around what Jrue Holiday's market value was and the number of teams who might be interested. Because really, all it takes is 2 teams get into a bidding war. I mean, I think that was a common topic of discussion for Anthony Davis as well. Different scale, of course, but whether your market is 10 teams or 2 teams, as long as your market's greater than 1, you can create some sort of if you're good, like we know David Griffin is, you can create a bidding war of sorts. And so we don't know a ton about. I mean, we kind of heard some stuff after the fact about the other teams that were interested and were willing to pay up, but there was, when push came to shove, there was no team that was going to be able to offer. No team really was as desperate, I guess, is the right way to frame it, than the Bucks, and that's what I feel like. What was my one takeaway with both the AD and Jrue deals is that is Griff preys on desperation better than a lot of GMs in the league, and the thing is you can make the argument with the Anthony Davis trade that when based on everything AD said, everything was back channel about the Lakers and AD wanted to be there, that the Lakers were kind of bidding against themselves and the level of what they were willing to offer. And Griff still got a pretty nice haul, things considered. And then the same thing can be said for Jrue Holiday. It says, there was a lot of messaging about, well, the Heat aren't going to part with Harrow the Nuggets aren't going to part with Michael Porter Jr.
Yeah.
Sorry, I called him Mega Porter Jr. in our last Pelicans podcast, so I feel like I've got to stick with that. And then you've got and then you had the Nets, who, you know, if the centerpiece is LeVert, I mean, that's fine, but there was a lot of talk about, well, if it's going to be the Nets, if they're going to be the winner here, do you have to get a third team involved to get the right grouping of players and picks that the Pelicans would want? And so there was nothing that was rumored up in the days and hours up into the trade that seemed anywhere close to what the Pelicans got. And so, you know, that's why I say, you know, it simultaneously surprised me and didn't, because I always thought that Jrue was going to get a nice return given the limited other options of Jrue Holiday's ability that were available this offseason. But still, it's more than was rumored in the days beforehand. So it was interesting.
Yeah, it was just because I think the part of the conversation was, can the Nuggets figure out a way to get the deal done without including Michael Porter Jr., like just as a framework for it. And then you see what the Pelicans actually ended up getting for Jrue Holiday, and it's like, oh, well, holy shit, like that clearly was never going to happen if Michael Porter Jr. was not on the table. So
exactly,
what do you think of the move that surprised me was the Steven Adams move and the subsequent extension? I really wanted him, and I think that this was probably like a prevailing national perspective, wanted to see a center who could space the floor play next to Zion. But Zion didn't play with that type of center last year, and like some of those minutes ended up being just fine. What do you think of every element of the Steven Adams acquisition, like the price they paid, and then they extend him, and then just his general fit next to Zion and the rest of the team?
Yeah. And so I think, so it's easy to say, and I'm one of them, to say that, you know, you want a floor spacer next to Zion. Like, yes, you do. But also you need a lot from that center position in general. And you have to make, unless you're getting a guy like Karl-Anthony Towns, which, you know, would probably be a dream fit next to Zion, you're going to have to give on something. So is it defense? Is it rebounding? Is it 3-point shooting from that position? And so I think Steven Adams checks literally every other box that Griff had for the center next to Zion, except for shooting. And so I'll take it. I mean, I think the acquisition cost for Steven Adams, the player, was a little steep. I think the cost for Steven Adams for what he is and what they want him to be off the floor, which it shows with the extension they gave him for the extra 2 years, which after that Gobert extension, I'm very much okay with paying Steven Adams $17 a year for a couple more years. Who's one of those guys like Jrue where you say, wait, he's how old? I thought, and like you think that he was like 3 or 4 years older than that. And so like I feel good about it overall. And so like Steven Adams is going to help the Pelicans defense and rebounding, starting fast breaks, which I know this team is probably not going to run quite like they did under Alvin Gentry, but they're still going to want to push the pace off of the shots. And he's a great guy to start that break and kick it out to Lonzo or Bledsoe. And he's a fantastic screen setter, and I think that'll do a lot to help the Pelicans with getting guys free, like, you know, whether it's BI or JJ Redick, guys like that. Mm-hmm. And also, I think the part that's most under appreciated nationally is the off the floor stuff, and relative to what the Pelicans have needed for so long. And so, you know, I'm always of the mind, no matter where you are in your development cycle, you need vets. You can't just load up a young team without having any vets on the roster and just say, well, some of them will pan out, some of them won't. Like, you need the veteran presence in the locker room. And not just that, you need vocal guys. And the Pelicans have not had that. They've had great leaders in Jrue Holiday, Derek Favors, but they're soft-spoken guys. And I think JJ Redick was the first guy who really will talk a lot relative to some of those other guys. And they just added not just Adams, but also Bledsoe, mostly more so Adams and Bledsoe, but they added guys who are going to hold other players accountable. Like if you're Jackson Hayes or Zion in practice, like, good luck going up against Steven Adams. Like, he's going to make you fight every single minute. And so I just think that he brings a lot to this team, both on and off the floor, that maybe isn't captured by analytics or stats. And so as much of an analytics guy as I am, like I see the value in that. And so I love the addition. I think the fit with next to Zion is not perfect, but better than a lot of people may be giving credit for.
Yeah, and look, they've cornered the market on front court players on whose arms you can do pull-ups. So that's between him and Zion. So that's always fun. And
no doubt.
And look, I think the fact that he helps defensively is like, maybe you could just figure out like any awkwardness on offense later, just because he does. People seem so down on him defensively, and I know he's not. Like, there's this idea of you need to be matchup proof at the 5. I understand he's not matchup proof, but like every year in OKC, basically opponents got to the rim just substantially less when he's on the court. His boxing out's going to help their defensive rebounding.
Right.
Like, you would think it makes it easier for guards to grab boards and just get out and go. And so I think that
Josh Hart and Lonzo are two great guards to do that too. So it fits.
Right. And the other thing is, like, he only turned 27 in July. So it's not like he's super ancient. And again, I wasn't crazy about the decision to get him or the extension, but he's only 27 and he helps your defense. And like you said, the off-court stuff, that'll clearly matter. So I warmed on it, where like I've soured on Tristan Thompson in Boston the more I think about it. I've warmed on Steven Adams more in New Orleans the more I think about it.
Yeah, and one other piece of this I think is important is that who knows if he finishes out that contract in New Orleans, right? I expect him to be unless like the fit looks awful, I expect him to be in New Orleans all of the season, all of next season. So year 3, that becomes a very movable salary, and you can use Steven Adams plus a couple of the picks you have from the Lakers or the Bucks to really make a move and get someone else. And if there's anything we know about small markets like New Orleans, you're only going to get a marquee free agent if you're a legit title contender. Otherwise, you've got to either draft or trade for those guys. And so you've got to put yourself in a position to do that. And I think, that last year, the Steven Adams deal in combination with some of the picks, you can set yourself up for success, as you continue to build this team.
Are the spacing concerns fair for this team, though? I had mentioned something on Twitter about it. I think it was like a few days ago, and I got a few Pelicans fans I mentioned saying, they were they shot the ball well from 3 last year, and they were 9th in 3-point attempt rate. I think they were 5th in 3-point percentage, but a lot of that just feels like a perfect storm of things that could like not happen this year. Like, one, you exchanged Jrue Holiday for Eric Bledsoe. Like, that's just a spacing downgrade. Lonzo had a career year from deep. Is he going to replicate that? I believe in Brandon Ingram's jump, but like, what if he declines at all? And you're also, the thing that I don't think is being talked enough about is, Zion shot, his percentage was fine from 3, but he wasn't taking a bunch of them. And now he's going to be on the court, hopefully just a lot more. And so I just feel like it puts more pressure on them to find lineups where they can have, 3 shooters on the court at once. And just the way their front court is set up, I think that makes it a little bit difficult. And then even with some of their guards, having Bledsoe there, and then again, what happens if Lonzo drops off a little bit?
Yeah, I think you make a ton of fair points. I was doing the season preview pod for the Pels with Nate Duncan the other day, and one of the things that he said that stuck with me was, statistically speaking, the difference in 3-point shooting between Eric Bledsoe and Jrue Holiday is not that significant. However, teams give a shit when Jrue spots up. Teams generally don't when Bledsoe does, and that is what spacing is, right? It's how well you can force defenders to make tough decisions, and so. I think that's certainly a fair point with Bledsoe, the Jrue to Bledsoe trade-off. And then I agree with the other points around, Lonzo I think with Lonzo and BI, like you said, I think the shot's sustainable, but is the jump in percentage that we saw, from one year to the next sustainable? I don't know. And then of course, Zion, you're exactly right. But I'd say the other point with Zion is, it's not like the Pelicans were replacing him with dead-eye shooters when, besides Melly was a spacer. But besides that, I mean, like, unless they were talking about adding a guard in for the position that Zion was playing, they didn't always replace him with spacing. And so, but that said, I mean, I think, it would be a foolish thing to say if you were going to say the Pelicans are going to finish top 10 in 3-point shooting again this year. However, I don't think it's as much of a problem as a lot of people may think. The Steven Adams point I made, I think, is also around his ability to create help with spacing with his screening ability. I think matters a lot, and I think he's going to help more than Favors did last year in that regard. I expect this team to be like around league average in 3-point percentage. And I mean, it'd be silly for me to say like, between 50th and 20th, because like with most of these stats, with various teams in the league, anything between 10 and 20 is separated by not much. It's a rounding error. So like, I think they'll be, I don't think they're going to be terrible. So like, I think they'll be around league average. And I think there's going to be times where you see the spacing becomes a problem against good teams. But I think that, in the long run, they'll figure it out. Like, maybe not this season, but I don't think that they're trying to solve every single problem they're going to have this season.
So I'm so excited to watch like Zion this year, just to have hopefully a full year of Zion. I will preface this, as I've said on every pod, I basically did a preseason basketball blackout because I didn't want it to color the way I was writing about my player rankings that I was doing at the time, since the rankings weren't based on it. But from like watching a few clips of him, it seems like he looks like really good. I'm just curious to your thoughts as to how he's looked during the preseason, what you've liked most, anything that's just stood out.
So a couple things. One is the way that Stan's already clearly trying to get him involved off the ball and moving. And this is certainly something that happened with Alvin Gentry as well. But it's clearly a focus. They're making him, he's more than just a guy who's going to catch the ball in the post and just bully people. He's going to. It's so amazing to see someone with his frame so quick, just like a dribble, and can acrobatically get around people and get to the rim and score. He covers so much distance, so it's so easily and effortlessly, it seems like. But the other thing that I think is most encouraging to me is seeing his effort on defense. And I tend to take almost nothing from preseason besides don't get hurt. But that said, I think effort matters, especially with the way this team played in the bubble last year. They looked so lethargic. They looked like they didn't give a shit. And so seeing Zion clearly trying and he looked better, and he's not good yet, obviously, but I think it's promising for me to see him making those types of strides on the defensive end from where he was last year, which was just objectively terrible. So that's where I'm looking for it to see what he can do, because he can't be as good as he is offensively. He can't be this world class top 5 guy in the league without being at least competent on or average to above average on the defensive end. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to make that argument for anyone. James Harden's, I guess, the closest you can go, but even he has gotten a bad rap on defense in certain cases. I mean, there's been years where he hasn't tried, but when he does try, he's passable. And so I really want to see Zion take a step forward on the defensive end this year.
I wonder if it helps him that it feels like Stan Van Gundy's teams have always just overachieved on defense. Where you look at like some of those Pistons squads that he had, it felt like they could have just been a lot worse, and he wasn't given like this premier defensive talent. And so I'm just wondering if having Stan Van Gundy there ends up helping.
Which he did to himself, though, right?
Yeah,
in Detroit.
Yeah, that's true too. That's not pointed out nearly enough. So I'm wondering if that ends up helping Zion. My other question for him was, though, do you see them ever getting to a point, and whether or not that's the season where Zion might be initiating some of the offense rather than doing like a lot of the, not just off ball stuff, but like more, they're not counting on him to like get them into their sets in the half court or running a ton of pick and rolls. Do you see him ever getting to that point?
Yeah, I think they'll give him chances. I mean, for no other reason than they need to with this group they currently have. Like, I mean, Bledsoe is your point guard in a traditional half court sense, but they don't have a guy that they're always going to go to, who's going to dominate the ball in terms of being able to create and score. I mean, Ingram, they're going to give him more chances, but he's when you put the ball in his hands, it's kind of an isolation and look for his shot rather than facilitating. But I'm sure that's something they're going to look for him to improve on this year as well. Then Lonzo, they would love for him to improve in his game in that regard, but he's been allergic to the paint for most of his career, so he's usually more of like a facilitator than maybe catch a pass and then throw another one versus actually driving. So they need playmaking, and so unless you think Nickeil Alexander-Walker's going to make this huge jump this year, they need it. And I think you could do much worse than trying to put more of that on Zion and seeing what happens, right? I mean, so trial by fire. I mean, let these guys, as long as you're not giving them, putting them in positions where they're going to develop bad habits. I mean, set them up for success and push the envelope, see what these guys can do. And Zion's certainly no different.
Yeah, and it seems just like he's already making good decisions when he's like going downhill. And so just the idea of like, he's like basically a tornado with dancer's feet. And so the idea of just getting him in more positions where he's going to be able to like get downhill and forcing him to, I guess, yeah, you have to make more decisions or complicated decisions in those situations. I would just like to see it, because that does, I think if he's able to do that, that just has such a huge impact on the way that they're able to run their offense then.
For sure.
So for Brandon Ingram, we kind of already touched on this, that we both just, I think that he's closer to his normal than not when looking at last season. he wasn't like taking these crazy off the dribble threes. It was just a matter of really improving like his set percentage. He's always felt like, dating back to his time in the Lakers, I felt like he always was able to get to his spots. It just felt like a lot of those shots were like finally falling last year. There's the free throw percentage jump was huge, but they're also like they're free throws. And so like if you can shoot threes, like why can't you improve your free throws? So like what are you like looking for him looking for from him this season? Is it a matter of just being better on defense because he was so bad, or is there something to the idea that, hey, maybe now that you have Zion full time, that it could end up impacting Ingram's influence over the offense?
Yeah, it's going to sound a little similar to Zion because I defense is where I'm looking first because, and I think we'll get to this as well. The Pelicans don't exactly have a ton of depth on the wing,
That's one way to put it.
Which is I'm a broken record over the last decade of Pelicans basketball because that's always been a problem. Hence the last time they gave a big money contract to a wing was Solomon Hill, so it probably tells you all you need to know there. But yeah, I mean, so defense matters. He was kind of like the lack of effort on the defensive end. He was during the bubble. He was certainly a centerpiece to that. He does well in one-on-one matchup situations a lot of times. I mean, I think the example people who defend Ingram's defense will point to a lot is he did really well against Porzingis last year. I don't know how to explain it, but he defended him very well, and he does. Guys that are similar to him in that they're not super quick, but he can use his length to really disrupt and cause problems. I think he can do that in isolation situations, but he kind of loses people when off the ball. His focus can sometimes slip, and he's not the super freak athlete type guy. He's just he kind of goes through the motions sometimes. So I think that's the area. But I think if he gets the right coaching, if he gets put in, if Stan can really make an impact on him, he's got the wingspan, he's got the ability to be good. And so we'll see if that can start to the switch can start to flip on that end. But really, yeah, I think I agree with your assessment of him offensively and his improvement. That I think the reason I'm buying in so much is that it wasn't like he just had some random erratic jump in one area, except for maybe 3-point shooting. But I think even there, he showed enough to think that an improvement in 3-point shooting is sustainable, and he's certainly good enough to warrant teams paying attention to him when he spots up. But he really improved his game across the board statistically on both volume and efficiency. And so I'm looking for him to continue to try to improve his ability to create for others as well, putting the ball in his hands, running him at some point forward sets and seeing what he can do there. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm looking forward to an improved season from him, hopefully on both ends.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like during his latter 2 seasons in LA, like he was basically close to the version of the player that he became in New Orleans before his injuries, where he was shooting like okay volume. It wasn't like as high a volume, but he was hitting his threes, and so that's what really made me kind of buy into it too. Is like if he's had like longer stretches of more efficient offense, higher volume offense before, it's just injuries derailed it. It was like, oh, this is the product of what happens when he's healthy for the entire season. This is the question I've been burning to ask you, though, as you know, before the start of the pod. Lonzo Ball, what makes him so divisive, not just in general, but amongst the Pelicans fan base specifically? I'll see you having like they'll come across my TL just randomly. You're having like heated debates with all these different people about Lonzo Ball, and I know Shamit will have them too. And it fascinates me because his play style is confusing to me, and I don't know how I view him long term. I don't necessarily like him for this team. It feels like they need someone who could do more than just be this like guy who ferries them into these open floor transition opportunities. They need like more of an actual like half court point guard. But can you explain to me like what's the root of this division in New Orleans?
Look, the fact of the matter is that when the Anthony Davis trade happened, there were a lot of Los Angeles fans who loved the young guys, and some of them came over to support the Pelicans, which is great. But at the same time, there are some maybe dissenting opinions around the abilities of those Lakers players, and I will be the first to say that I sorely underestimated Brandon Ingram. And I think a lot of people nationally, I'm not saying I was not alone on this island. Like a lot of people were like, don't know about BI, and he proved everyone wrong. Most improved player of the Hero Award. I mean, the difference with Lonzo is it's not about his abilities as much as it was what he does well. And so I've been pretty adamant over the last few months, a year, really about what I think Lonzo is and what I think he's not. And a lot of his the fan base that supports him so strongly, I think vehemently disagrees with that assessment. So I'm of the opinion, based on what I've seen, he doesn't get into the paint. When he does, he often turns the ball over. He doesn't like to get fouled because he's not a good free throw shooter. He doesn't do a lot of the things even close to passable that a point guard should be able to do. And when you're that bad at some of those things, you rarely see players that bad go to good. Maybe he can get to below average or even average in some of those things, which would be fantastic. But I don't never expect him to be good or at penetrating and driving and kicking, or driving and drawing fouls, going to the free throw line, things like that. What I do think he's really good at is that same type of point guard responsibilities in transition. He's great at catching outlets and looking up floor immediately and creating mismatches. And obviously Zion exacerbates that ability. I mean, it's a perfect pairing in transition, those two. He's great at catching a pass from the point guard and immediately looking and finding the right next pass to make. He's shown that he can really improve his 3-point shooting ability. He's worked with Fred Vinson, Pelican assistant coach, extensively there, and the results are pretty apparent. So he does a lot of good things. They're just not. I just don't see him as a point guard, and that creates a lot of divisiveness among some fans. But I think he's a very interesting case. We found out today that he's not going to be. They're not going to reach an extension before restricted free agency next summer, which comes as no surprise to most people who are following this team closely. But I think it's going to be a very interesting year for Lonzo. And I think he helps this team a lot. I think if New Orleans gets a sense that he's going to cost much more than they're willing to give him, then they may look at other options. But I think if he's in the right role, which is how Stan Van Gundy has talked about him, then he can be successful. The question is he worth what he might get on the open market?
Yeah, and look, I would say, one, young players can get better, but if you're looking at Markelle Fultz getting $50 million and knowing that Lonzo Ball right now is a better player, it seems like not signing him to an extension was a good decision for both player and team at this point, because he's clearly going to get more money in the market. And I was really high on him for most of last year. And I'm not trying to bring this all back to rankings, but I had him so high when I did the NBA 100 rankings, basically solo, at the end of the first regular season before the bubble. And then when I was watching him in the bubble and then digging into it for the latest version that I did, and we also had like a larger panel, he dropped more so than any single player from like the end of last season until now. So like it wasn't that one stretch that swayed me, but when I went to go watch him more, I do really like what he can do in the open floor. I feel like he can be like, he gives them so many options on defense as well that could help them, I think, long term. But I just don't. You mentioned it already, and I don't want to like just belabor that point, but they need him. I don't see the player that they need in the half court. Like he looks so. I don't know if it's uncomfortable or indecisive when he gets into the lane. He shot 33.9% on drives last year, and so like his volume is one thing where it's like he still doesn't necessarily seem like he wants to be super aggressive with shooting, but like to have that level of non-finishing from your point guard when he's inside the arc and like trying to break down defenses is just, it feels like it's going to be a huge conundrum for them. And I don't want to bring everything back to the money, but you've already paid Brandon Ingram. Like it gets to a point where now you're just reinvesting in all these young players before you're necessarily a fully finished product. And you have Josh Hart to think of too, who's really important to this team. And so I feel like he just is going to end up being in a lot of trade rumors this year.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Hart, because he's a guy who I feel like maybe doesn't get the respect he deserves nationally for what he does. And so I'm not saying that he's definitely going to be even starting two guard at any point in his career. I sure hope he will, but he's what he can do defensively, rebounding, shooting, and the hustle, I think it's most important, or not most important, but it's one of the things that I think is maybe most underappreciated with him. He's 110%. every single minute of the game, and it is really inspiring to see. And I think every team could use a player like him. And so I'm still very curious to see if something breaks while we're recording about whether or not the Pelicans will agree to an extension with him. I honestly have no clue. I expected they wouldn't with Lonzo for all the reasons that you and I both discussed about how far apart both sides would be. But I think there's there's more of a chance if they can agree to, especially now that they locked in Steven Adams, and it seems like they've got a direction around whether or not they think they want to be a cap team or or over the cap team. But who knows? Well, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and you don't have to talk me into Josh Hart, and that's why if you can sign him to an extension, you might want to, just because there's going to be a lot of money floating around in the market next year, and now there's just not stars to spend it on, and so there's going to be some teams that do some reckless things, and he's just the archetype of player, where maybe he's a little bit undersized for a wing, but what he's going to give you defensively, and then his 3-point splits have kind of been all over the place, but he can hit. Defenses have to respect his 3-point shot. I would expect him to be able to find really significant offers. The next thing I want to ask you about was what type of role does Jackson Hayes play this year? And is it larger? Could it be smaller than last year just because now you don't have an injury-prone Derek Favors factoring into the front court rotation, and you've replaced him with Steven Adams, who you are at least, you're somewhat invested in because you did extend him.
Yeah, I mean, I like Jackson Hayes a lot. I think he's still a child. And I say that because he didn't even start playing basketball until he was 13, 14 years old. So he's 19 or 20 right now, but he's kind of a younger 19 or 20, if that's possible to even say, than you'd expect. And so he did get forced into a role that was probably too much for him last year with the Favors injury. I mean, he's flashy. He can dunk. He can block shots. He's very long, but he's still very much learning how to play the game at the NBA level. And so if he takes a step back in minutes this year, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. I am very much looking forward to, like I mentioned briefly earlier, seeing him work against guys work on the glass against Steven Adams, Zion, even Hernan Gomez. I think he's going to get a bunch of challenges in practice, and I'm hoping that can really help expedite his learning curve, even if he doesn't play as much. But I mean, I think he's still. I'd say he's right now the fourth big on this team, behind Melly, especially if you want to give Zion spot minutes at the 5 as well. So I could see his minutes being inconsistent, but I don't see that as a reflection on his potential as a player for this New Orleans team. I just think he's young and he's still learning, and so I could see a pretty wide range of outcomes for his total minutes for New Orleans this year. I could see him falling behind Hernan Gomez in the depth chart just because they want more rebounding. Or, but I mean, I think that's an unlikely outcome. But I think, or even Gabriel too. I mean, I think the Pelicans signed those guys to be practice bodies as much as anything else. Maybe Hernan Gomez more so than Gabriel. I think Gabriel they maybe have a little bit may fit a little bit better with the standing on these styles, and there could be a reason for that signing. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a longer road with Hayes, and I don't want to rush to conclusions too soon.
Do you see the outline of a good defender there? I know you mentioned his shot blocking. Is it just sort of a matter of him settling down and making better decisions, not fouling as much?
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, I mean, defense, I think maybe takes a little bit longer to learn in the NBA level than offense, and I think that's the hope, right? I mean, if you're going to draft a 5 that high, you've got to see it defensively as a guy who can really make a difference. And so, if not, then you're drafting a guy who, if you think he tops out as a mediocre defender who isn't that great of a shooter, I mean, where's his role in the league? So, or at least as a top 10 pick. And so I think that potential is still very much there.
So we kind of touched on this already. How concerning is the dearth of wings here? Because Ingram is their only true wing, and then I throw Josh Hart in there just because you have to, and you
have to. Yep.
Yeah. But what happens from there? Is Wenyen Gabriel going to get minutes at the 3? Is Thornwell going to factor into this? I like Gabriel. I feel like if you tapped into his veins, there'd be Red Bull coursing through them. He just plays with that type of energy, but I don't like him at the 3 necessarily. Maybe he's
sure.
Maybe so. What is happening with this team? Are we going to see maybe is it more likely that we see some players play up where it's Nickeil Alexander-Walker looks like a de facto wing at some points? I'm so confused looking at their depth chart.
Yeah. I mean, so that's one of the questions, right? Is the Pelicans by virtue of the Steven Adams move, they restricted themselves because of the tax line because they still have a decent, I think that all of the mid level, and so but they can't use it because they'd be a tax team if they sign one more player. They only have 14 guys in the roster right now. So I mean, there's a decent number of reasons to expect there to be a trade in season, which would change the calculus there, but I mean, yeah, there's a question of, so they went and signed two bigs for the minimum, in Gabriel and Hernan Gomez, but they didn't touch the wing other than Thornwell. And so Lou, the team clearly likes based on the couple preseason games. They see him playing a role on it. So I think you'll see minutes for Thornwell. I think, like you said, it's a fair assessment around Josh Hart maybe getting minutes as a three. But I think more than anything, you see a lot of three guard lineups. I think that they won't be shy to play Redick alongside Bledsoe and Lonzo. Yeah, the nice thing about Lonzo is he's 6'6", he's able to guard a little bit bigger. Not in the same way that Jrue Holiday was. I mean, Jrue Holiday, one of the best kept secrets in the league that kind of isn't that much of a secret anymore, is how well he can defend the post against pretty much anybody. And so, yeah, that's not really something you're going to see from many of the other guards in this team, but they've got some versatility to play some three guard lineups and still be passable defensively. So I think that's what I would expect more than anything else. I would not expect that the guy like Gabriel to play the three as much as I think Hart, Thornwell, and then three guard lineups come out.
Yeah, that's like something I didn't even really factor in. As I just looked at it as, Jrue left, like that's one person less that could defend wings. But as you mentioned, like what he can do in the post too, they're just so kind of all over the place defensively now. Is this? I guess like that's the other thing is like, what do you kind of see for this team defensively? You see Cleaning the Glass had them in 19th in points allowed per possession overall, and there's we could dig into like the specifics of what was happening there, but are they built to improve on that? Do they have a lower floor now somehow? Do you expect them to be right around the same area, or do you have any sort of feel for what they could be defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy way to say it is I expect it to be similar to last year. I think they got worse defensively. I don't think they got tremendously worse. I mean, I think Steven Adams is an upgrade on Favors defensively. But I think I'm lower than most.
I think I saw that argument in your timeline as well, not to interject, but
no.
Favors had an impact on their defense, but I agree that he just wasn't the way he was moving. And I don't know if his back was an issue all season or something, but he just doesn't move the same. And Adams is like surprisingly nimble for someone his size.
Right. Yeah, fully agree. And yeah, I mean, Favors was the only above average defender they had inside. And so his on-off numbers look good, but I think he was fine. I don't think he was great. His rim protection numbers were awful last year, way worse than what he had in Utah. And like you said, the mobility was not there. And so I think the upgrade to Adams helps. Obviously, the move from Jrue to Bledsoe is a downgrade, but I think, like many have said, it's less of a downgrade in the regular season. It's going to show more in the playoffs, particularly for Milwaukee. I think maybe more so than New Orleans. But I think I think they have young players who should, in theory, improve, even if it's only marginally on that end. And most of all, I think their style of play this year is going to be more aligned to a defense that's improved. And so Stan Van Gundy, obviously, he gives a shit. He cares a lot about defense. The Pelicans coaching staff last year cared about defense, but that wasn't Gentry's forte. And so I think the combination of the fact this team's not going to be as crazy about getting out in transition and foregoing rebounding to do that, and then Stan Van Gundy's coaching style, I think this team should improve defensively, stylistically, but I think they also have to deal with a slight downgrade in defensive talent. So, if you assume those two things relatively offset, I say they come around league average defensively this year, assuming health. But again, you run into the same problem. Steven Adams has been an Iron Man of sorts, but if he misses time, they're in a bad spot. So,
yeah.
But I mean, you can say that about a lot of teams, right? If they lose one guy on one end of the floor, they're going to struggle. So we'll see.
Looking at some of their younger players, specifically the two most important ones, Kyra Lewis and Nickeil Alexander Walker, what type of roles do you envision for them, if any? Like, is Na like guaranteed minutes this year? Are they going to give Kyra Lewis the Nickeil treatment that they gave him last year, where he didn't really play? I remain most fascinated by he was just someone I zeroed in before the draft last year. Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I remain so fascinated by his game. Like it feels like it could be a little chaotic, but when he has it under control, there's just the outline of a really good NBA player there. So is he going to have a shot to get regular minutes, or do you think he kind of falls through the cracks a little bit more because they do have veterans like, you have Redick, you have Bledsoe, you have Lonzo there, and even Hart, if there are any minutes for him to log into too, because for some reason they have an excess of wings, which they clearly don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be surprised if Nod doesn't have a spot in the rotation. I mean, I think Gyro will be. I think your assessment about him getting the Nod treatment from last year is fairly accurate. But I think Nod lost his minutes to Frank Jackson, who I think is not a good player at all. But I think at the same time, the Pelicans wanted to, I guess, know for sure before they moved on from him, and they saw that after, despite the good summer league and preseason that Na had last year, he did everything he could to throw his minutes away once they gave him to him in the regular season. Like, he was not good. But I mean, I think your points are fair. Like, I think he's got a good chance to be really good in this league, and I think they're going to give him another chance here to, now Frank Jackson's not there to take his minutes away. And really not a lot otherwise has changed as far as who's in front of him in the Pelicans backcourt. Other than, therefore, I think Kyra is probably in a redshirt season of sorts. He's still pretty young. I would love to see him get some minutes, but I could also see them just bringing him along fairly slowly. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that we see Na take a step forward this year. But yeah, I mean, and then another, I guess, small thing is Etuan Moore's gone now. So his minutes were all over the place. I mean, I think he helped the Pelicans and made them better, but also I think at some point they wanted to see some of the younger guys get some playing time. But now that he's gone, that does open up a few more minutes in the backcourt. So I think that'll be something I expect to see as well. But I mean, I think fans might be, based on what we've seen in the preseason, I think fans who are looking to see the young guys might get a little frustrated with like Thornwell's minutes compared to Nickeil's or Kyra's, just because they like what they see from him sooner. But yeah, I mean, long story short, I'm hoping that we see Nog get some minutes this year to see if he can make improvements on last year.
Look, I don't know, like, Thornwell just hasn't played enough at the NBA level, but if he's like, his 3-point swings have been wild. If he can just hit wide open threes, I don't think there should be a problem with him getting minutes. But I was also, of the little preseason basketball I did catch, I think it was Pelicans, Miami. I'm like, can Na endear himself to the rotation by hitting consistently set threes? Because that's what he did in that game. I think from what I saw, he was hitting like 2 or 3 of them. And just based off what this team needs, like, if you can have someone who's going to consistently just be an outlet for Zion off the catch, and then of course he can put the ball on the deck when he needs to. I just would wonder what's the justification behind not playing him in that scenario. But as you said, he was wildly inefficient during his rookie season.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but also, I mean, tying this back to Lonzo, I mean, Na he's not afraid to drive and create contact and get into the paint. I mean, he thrives on it. And so if he's doing that, and the Pelicans saw many other guards who are going to attack the way he does, as long as he can do it relatively efficiently and create chaos, I mean, why not let him try to improve on that?
So the next thing I want to get to is, does this team have like mid-season turnover potential? And I kind of mean that from 2 different perspectives, because I think if in their situation where after you trade a player like Jrue, the assumption would be like, well, they're open-minded to maybe dealing some of their other veterans for future assets, but like, you need like 8 pages to like have to go through all their pick protections already. Like, they're kind of set in that department. And the other thing that I've considered, and I don't think this is novel, I'm sure it's been a talking point, is that I feel like Zion's best years could come earlier than normal, just based off how he plays, like athletically. And so would there be a push to, I don't want to see them, mishandle their timeline like they did with Anthony Davis early on, but is there like a scenario where maybe it's not this season, but potentially over the offseason, where there's maybe more of a push for them to consolidate some of thes assets, just because they recognize not only is Zion already good, but like, we don't know what type of player he's going to be at 28, 29, 30.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Nate Duncan said the same thing around Zion's timeline and expediting it. And I think that's always been the question is when, right? And I don't know if next summer is the time. I feel like sometimes it's all, almost at the mercy of other teams. And so like, when does, if you're banking on someone like Towns, like when does he ask out? Or even like I think Devin Booker was a hot name, and then they went and traded for Chris Paul. So, like, I don't think that, unless something goes horribly wrong there, I don't think he's asking out anytime soon. But I think that's kind of what they're, you look for the next disgruntled star, right? You can throw your match salary and throw some picks at. And so I think that's always been the thought process around accumulating all these draft picks from the Lakers and Bucks and whoever. Like, obviously those picks may not look that great, but all it takes is one to really pan out. And so I mean, I think that I certainly think that's the approach. Just don't know what the exact timeline is on that. And as far as more immediate this off or in season, I think there's certainly the potential for that. You've got a player like JJ Redick. If you don't see him staying in New Orleans past this year, and the Pelicans aren't looking like they're going to be in the thick of things. I mean, he could fetch something nice from a team that's looking to make a deeper playoff run. I don't know how much he would get. I mean, you can make a pretty damn good argument that JJ Redick's unplayable deeper in the playoffs because of his defense at this point in his career. But I mean, yeah, you could see certain things like that occur. I think maybe the argument against it is that now you have this play-in game, and so as long as you're within striking distance of the top 10, you can at least make things interesting. And I think this Pelicans team would feel like, as young as they are, they're hopefully only going to get better as the season goes on, and they kind of adapt to Stan Van Gundy's system. And if they're healthy going into that play-in game, they probably would feel like they can beat anyone that they'd be matched up with there. And so I think they're not going to punt on that opportunity for like a couple second round picks for JJ. But I mean, I certainly think that something like that is on the table to have some roster turnover, or even that's like we talked about Lonzo. Like if they don't see that if they don't feel like they're not willing to pay what they think Lonzo's going to get next summer, especially given what we're seeing around other top end talent getting locked into extensions, and then suddenly you've got all this cap space, but not many players to use it on. That's a recipe for disaster as a team. If you've got a player that you kind of like, but not like in love with. So yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the teams in the league that's more ripe for some midseason maneuvering.
Do you think it's more likely that Lonzo would get traded mid-season, or that it would be a sign and trade scenario over the summer with a team that might not have a ton of cap space?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought that far out, but I think I see it more likely to happen in season, because I feel like there's the roads start to separate, where it's either Lonzo started to figure some stuff out and he's a key piece of what we're doing here, or you just don't see it, but you still have a sneaking suspicion based on the talent that's available next summer that he's going to cost too much. And so why not move him to one of those teams that maybe is willing to pay him that, and they can, that maybe gives that team more options to go to in free agency in addition to Lonzo. So I think I lean towards the midseason, but and sign and trade next offseason being less likely.
I'd be curious to see what the market would be for him mid-season, where they might need to wait for it to develop, like for some teams to sort of fall out of the race, because I don't know that I see like obvious fits. Like Chicago's one, but I don't know what Chicago has that necessarily interests New Orleans. But I'm just going to be tracking the Lonzo situation and your mentions all season. I know this is always. Go ahead.
No, it's funny when you mentioned the Bulls, because I had a couple of running comments with some of the Bulls folks that I know from up here and up here. Well, since I live in Chicago, about they feel very similarly about Lauri Markkanen as New Orleans people I talk to feel about Lonzo. It's like, let's just flip them. But I don't know. It's a very intriguing concept, I feel like, because Markkanen can give you some of the floor spacing, but the other question is like, how good do you think Lauri can actually be? What's his ceiling? So, but it's just funny to hear both fan bases talk about those two players, because it sounds a lot alike.
Yeah, I'd more been thinking of like, would there be Lonzo plus like filler plus something small? Do they look at like a Zach LaVine was the framework? I wouldn't touch Lauri Markkanen, to be honest with you, although I guess he would fit if you trust Zion's I don't know how him and Zion would work defensively together. Probably not at all, but he does obviously provide that floor spacing. This question is going to be, I'm sure, fluid and purely matchup based, but what do you think is going to be their most common or best closing unit this season?
It's boring, but I think it's the starting lineup. I think it's Bledsoe, Lonzo, Ingram, Zion, and Steven Adams. I mean, you're going to see certain matchup plays where maybe they're going to throw Harden there or throw JJ for certain plays, but I think that's really most likely unless certain players make a jump. I don't expect like Nah or even Melly. But yeah, I mean, most commonly, I don't see a reason to go away from the starting five to close things out unless you got to get like super switchy and think that it makes sense to pull Adams out of there.
Yeah, I would be interested to see if Zion at the 5 could work in literally any of those situations. But if you need stops, then maybe that's where that becomes an issue, because all of a sudden you have Brandon Ingram at power forward or something. So that's not great. Is there a let's get weird lineup that you'd like to see them try at some point this season?
I mean, I'm a big fan of the 3 guard. So like I feel like Bledsoe with Lonzo and Josh Hart is a lot of fun, and then maybe going with the most fun weird lineups are always the ones that tend to be terrible on defense, right? Like it's and so like I'm going with Hart and Lonzo because they can give you some defense and they can give you some rebounding from the guard positions, which is nice, and they can space the floor, and then you put Ingram at the 4 and Zion at the 5. That can get fun. You better get stops on the perimeter though, because once if a guy gets past you, I'm not sure who's stopping him inside. But that'd be fun to me, and it's also like probably like Lakers fan heaven with the three Lakers players along with Zion and Bledsoe. But yeah, I mean that one's fun. And hey, I mean the most fun idea, right, is not being legit and having taken a huge leap in year 2, because he's got the skill set that is fun if he turns out to be good. And so I guess that's the X factor. But for now, yeah, that's what I'll go with.
So mine was, and I think I built one that would be combustible at both ends of the floor, which I think is proof that it's super weird. Is Ingram, Zion, Hart, Nah, and Redick. And you don't have a point guard in there, but I'm just wondering if they can get enough out of, like, look, Redick has run pick and rolls over the past few years pretty well. I'm wondering if you could get any out of Nah. There's Ingram, obviously, and some Zion. But I think it's not even just a matter of, they'll be bad on defense. There's a chance they'd be really bad on defense. There's a chance that they'd be terrible on offense as well.
I think Nah's a point guard. I mean, I guess we haven't seen enough of him at the NBA level to truly know what position he's going to play besides his combo guard. But I mean, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and call him a point guard until he gives me enough of a reason to not do that.
Yeah, well, hey, you don't have to talk me into it. I would swoon if I saw that lineup. So what's a realistic win total and Western Conference finish for this team? The last time I looked at their over-under, they were at 35.5. And for people like myself who cannot think in terms of 72 games, that's the equivalent of about a 40-win season. So where do you sort of land on that front?
I mean, that's about where I am. I think this team's most likely outcome is something just under 500, and I still think they're one of the top 10 teams in the West, and so I can have them in the play-in conversation. I mean, because I think, the hard part is obviously what the hell is going on with Houston. But I mean. Yeah. I've got them like just a game or two under 500. I think is the most realistic. But this team's got a fairly wide range of outcomes, and the starts and ends of Zion's health. So if we assume like a relatively healthy season for Zion, then the variability, standard deviation shrinks a decent amount. But yeah, not a sexy choice, but it is like it. I think that the West is so deep that it's hard to see the Pelicans making a huge dent unless they get like unless Zion turns into this like top 15 NBA player in year 2. And hey, I guess that's not totally outlandish. Zion is just a freak of nature, but yeah. I mean, you look at like Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Jazz, Blazers. I mean, I think all 6 of those teams are comfortably better.
Suns are going to be so good this year, I think.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, like I went I think a little too far after the Chris Paul trade, because I was like, oh wait, hold on. Depth matters this year more than a lot of years, because you have games happening relatively quickly during a pandemic, and so the Suns don't have much past their top. So you've got Ayton, Booker, Chris Paul, and Bridges, and then after that, it gets real dicey real fast. And so I like them as a playoff team. I don't know if I love them as much as I did before around like I'm much more willing, if I'm going to make like a crazy bet, it's that the Blazers are a top 4 seed this year. I think that's a deep, good team that's going to be a really good regular season team too. And so like that's, but yeah, I mean, like I still think, and this is the weird rivalry that's becoming a thing for New Orleans fans is the Grizzlies, because Grizzlies fans are getting so annoyed with Zion getting all this hype and John not getting nearly the same coverage. And like, as a New Orleans fan, you're just like, so you just put your hands and be like, sorry, like it's not our choice. Like we're not telling everyone to hype up Zion like this. And so like the Grizzlies fans get mad and like take it out on Pelicans fans. And so it's like this budding rivalry, and they're in the same division. So, but I still think New Orleans is a better team on paper than Memphis, and so I still want to put them ahead of Memphis. So yeah, I mean, like I think if they can get into the play-in game and then get in, like win, knock out a couple teams ranked higher than them and get into the playoffs, and that'd be a fun year for me.
I did consider when I was trying to figure out their ceiling and floor, I did consider putting their floor as 10th. I ended up moving it to 11th just to account for like some variance. Maybe they do hold a fire sale or something. I don't know. But like when you look at, I think the Kings have shown they're going to, and that the Thunder already have like just steered out of the conversation entirely. I'd agree with your sentiments on Memphis. I think they're going to take just looking at their record, maybe Ja takes a step forward, but I think they take a step back overall because of how tough the West is. You don't have Jaren Jackson Jr. to start the season. We don't know what Justice Winslow is going to look like or when he's going to play, and their wing depth isn't great. And so I'd be inclined to put New Orleans ahead of them. And then you just kind of have to figure, like you said, we don't know what's going on in Houston, but there's got to be like one team at least that's going to be worse than them aside from there. Like even Minnesota, I don't think they're going to be that good this year. I agree with your sentiments on Portland. That would be a spicy take for me. I actually have the Suns. I might be higher on them. I think the issue of Chris Paul is fair, like in a truncated schedule. How many games does he play? But I like their depth, I guess, a little bit more than you do. Cam Johnson, Javon Carter, Etuan Moore. I thought they just had a really good Saric offseason. So, but I think the Pelicans, I would expect them to make the play-in. I only move their floor a little bit lower because I do feel like there's variance in how they view themselves, which could affect like what happens during the middle of the season.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. And like one other thing that I think is super interesting with New Orleans, and it's similar conversation I'm sure you would have if you talked to, I don't know if you've done your Dallas preview yet, but both those teams were just so bad in crunch time that it's almost unsustainable. They're so bad again. I mean, Dallas is even weirder because they were like this elite offense that just was abysmal in crunch time. It just made no sense. And like at least with New Orleans, they were like an average to slightly above average team in normal situations that cratered in crunch time. But I just can't see that repeating to the same degree, especially with more structure. Understand, I think their results go better there, and their like net rating is much more in line with their record. And so I think that's something I'd see improve this year too.
It'd be really funny if Dallas was, well, I shouldn't say funny, maybe that's mean, if Dallas was betting crunch time again, just because, Luka, better decision-making, that probably gives you a bump, but like they didn't necessarily improve the shot creation around him, but not the Mavericks pod. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think we need to touch upon, or something that's, miscovered or misperceived about this team from a national perspective?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think the one thing that I lightly touched on before that has been, I think I've gotten the most kind of surprise reactions to, was the discussion around Favors versus Steven Adams, because Favors has this pretty strong reputation as a good defensive big man. And it's just like, and the advanced stats in New Orleans kind of at a high level aligns that, given like what they look like with him on the floor versus off. But I couldn't feel more strongly about the upgrade from Favors to Steven Adams, just because of just watching games and seeing that, seeing how Favors looked moving around, and obviously certainly somewhat injury related, but it just looked like he was much older than the player I saw in Utah. And I mean, the rim protection numbers are way down, and a lot of other stuff that Steven Adams just does better. And so I am very excited for that switch on and off the floor. And I think that's going to, his teams are always better when he's on the floor, and his Thunder teams have been. He's just, I feel like you go around the league and you can't find anyone that'll say a bad thing about the guy. And I'm just really, I think that he's going to offset the downgrade from Jrue to Bledsoe more than people give credit to. And so like that's that's one thing I'm looking for. And now watch as a typical New Orleans team, he'll get injured in like the third game of the season because I've said all that. That's New Orleans. That's what we come to expect with this team, but hopefully not.
Well, I think I like the offensive fit with Adams. If you're going to have like the non-shooting type big besides Zion, I like Adams better than Favors.
Yep.
Maybe a healthier Favors could be. There's a path to him being better defensively, but the other thing with his swings, looking at those on-off numbers for Favors, they were working with a very low baseline, like when he came back, from his initial injury, and so like that's going to naturally, if you're competent, like that's just going to uplift by default because there's the how much worse can you get factor.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
But Mason, this was great. Thank you for giving me so much of your time. So close to the season, mind you. That was not my expectation. I thought this was going to leak into the regular season. If you guys are not following Mason on Twitter, remedy that post haste. He's at Mason Ginsberg. That's at MASONGINSBERG. He is the co-host of the Blue Wire podcast In the Know and the occasional writer for Bourbon Street Shots. Again, follow him on Twitter. Mason, thank you so much for doing this. I always love talking Pelicans with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was great.